12.14 is here, and there are some new OPs, some champs you shouldn't play anymore, and some really big systems-wide, map-wide changes to pay attention to. If you want to know what you should be doing in the new patch, check out this video. There are always timestamps down in the description below, as well as a TLDR at the end. So if you want to win, let's talk about it. First up, Aatrox is getting some health growth. He's losing some healing, but the overall result is, well, a bunch of health and a bit less healing. He has gained win rate in this patch, actually about 1.5% for the average player in solo queue. Overall, a very big deal, and Aatrox appears to be in a very, very strong state. So if you have been missing your Aatrox play, well, come bring him back up because he's doing pretty well overall. A bit over 50% win rate, overall solid champion. And at the end of the day, the just overall health growth just means more than a very, very small cut in the healing. Alistar got a lower mana cost and cooldown on his Q. This ability you already maxed first, so going from 11 to 10 seconds on your most important skill is a pretty big deal here as well. Now, it won't affect how well he can all-in an enemy champion by any means. His burst damage isn't down any, but in any medium to long duration team fight, getting your next stun a bit sooner is going to be a big deal. Alistar has also gained about 1.5% win rate and sits at a pretty respectable 50% win rate here as well as a totally viable option. Gangplank gets a much bigger set of changes. His base health is down, but his health grows up, and his base armor is down. So his early game is weaker and his late game is stronger. This ends up being less health until after level 6 and less durability and physical damage until about level 9. To go with that, there is now a crit scaling on the damage of Trial by Fire. So later on, if you can get into melee range and you have a much crit chance, you'll do more true damage to your opponent. Parlay is down early and up late. And Powder Keg is also down early and up late. Additionally, the slow is down to get a lot of crit chance, and the bonus damage on crit has been cut pretty meaningfully as well. So, as we talked about, his health is down until level 7, his physical durability is down until level 10, his basic Q damage is down until level 7, his Q plus E damage is down until level 8, and if you were to crit the barrel, his overall damage is always down on Q plus E. Now, there's two versions of this ability that might make sense. Either the 25 and 10% damage is strictly added on to the crit damage of 1.75, or it's a multiplier at the end after everything else. I'm not sure which. This is the less stark version of the nerf. There is a more stark version where it is multiplicative, and it's actually even farther down. So Crit Gangplank does less damage, but the slow is massively weaker and only gets remotely closer with more crit chance. This requires 40% crit chance to keep up. This requires 80% crit chance to keep up. So in most cases, you are always slowing for less. You are dealing less damage with your crit barrels. You are doing more damage with non-crit barrels, which is interesting. But you're overall much weaker in the early game. This ends up being a nerf overall to the champion. And even though we talked about how the bonus damage on crit is down, which makes crit barrels feel less good, keep in mind that your slow is nerfed by more if you're not a crit build, and your passive does more damage if you are a crit build. This ends up balancing things out a little bit. Gangplank overall has lost win rate in this patch. Most of that win rate drop is in bruiser builds. Trinity Force and the like have lost over 1% win rate as a first item. Crit builds like Essence Reaver have lost much less win rate, but are still down a little bit as well. So Crit Gangplank more or less survives. Bruiser Gangplank went down a fair bit. Gnar loses 40 health and some health regen growth. This ends up being actually a pretty meaningful nerf of about 1.75%. Data is not terribly interesting. Here's the health before and after. Here is the overall regen over the course of a full minute before and after. Pretty simple stuff here, but this does mean that there's a really good chance that Gnar is kicked out of the pro meta because this is a pretty low win rate for the champion, and because we're in a world where people are pretty happy to pick aggressive champions, there are a lot of good counters to Gnar out there. Janna gets a big set of changes, actually more than what's on the screen right here, because a lot of heal and shield power items get nerfed in this patch as well. So her flat shield is up by 10, her monsoon heal is up by 10, 0, and 5, as well as a 5% AP ratio bump, but the free bonus heal and shield power she gets from Eye the Storm, well, free, just a land CC to get it, has gone down. So here's the math on Janna Shield. Obviously, the baseline value is higher, but if you were to land 1 CC, Q, W, or whatever, and then cast Shield, here are your numbers instead. Buffed 1 through 8, nerfed 9 and onwards. Keep in mind, again, there are nerfs to heal and shield power items as well. So even up to around here, assuming you pick up a Forbidden Idol or something, you're also going to feel nerfs around this point in time as well. Assuming you land a buff at any point. But if, If you don't land the knockback or anything before casting E, you're pretty much almost always going to be stronger. It's only at about 2 to 3 items you're going to start feeling this instead. And honestly, 2 to 3 items is very late in the game, would overall be a buff otherwise. As far as R healing, again, the baseline is up quite a bit as well. Now, the nice thing about R is R comes with its own knockback. So you're actually much more likely to land CC when casting the ability. So this is a much more accurate data table in terms of sort of real world application. Again, you should easily have at least 1 heal shield power item by this point in time. Probably 1 by here as well. So a good chance that the monsoon healing really is going to be overall lower in a lot of cases. The end result ends up being a pretty small, like 0.4% win rate nerf to Janna. Not a big deal, but certainly a nerf overall. But again, to a very small degree, she is still a pretty strong champion. Next up, we get a look at Jarvan. So Jarvan gains quite a bit this patch. He gains a 0.2 bonus AD ratio on Dragon Strike and 0 to 2 seconds off of Demacian Standard's cooldown. This ends up being a pretty big deal overall. It's looking pretty good for our boy. Now, what's interesting is pre-patch, it was actually very, very worthwhile to go for Sunfire or Chem Tank over Gore Drinker. Those items ended up being very, very good. And right now, because Jarvan's not that popular and most players go Gore Drinker, there isn't enough data to say for sure if the changes to his AD ratios and the change to Sunfire has made him better or worse on a tank build or not. Ultimately, obviously it is a strict buff. He does gain some win rate. For solo queue, it's about 1.5% win rate up, and it means that for the average player, he is right about bang on balanced as a, yeah, sure, an early game champion, but a relatively good one. So Jarvan, I think, is totally back. He's not OP, he's not a must ban, but he's definitely a solid champion and really worth considering. As far as a look at what this could mean, if you are doing an AD build, your Q damage is up by 3 to 8%. Flag code, of course, better from levels 8 onwards. Pretty standard stuff, ultimately. Kayn gets 10 health growth and loses 5% healing via his passive. Now, it's worth noting this is only, of course, for Rost. So Blue Kayn just gets a strict buff. Period. End of story. He gets 10 more scaling health. For Rost, it's going to be a little bit different. And so what does that look like? Well, substantially more health here, right? Up to the tune of eventually 170 more health. And the question is, how much damage would you have to deal for the healing cut to nerf you beyond just the base health growth? And it looks like it's probably a buff overall, because this is ability damage only, dealt to champions, after armor MR, as far as I can tell. From what I read, that's what's going on here, which means, you know, in a level 13 team fight, are you dealing 2,000 spell damage to champions just with your abilities after armor? Now, the answer might be yes, and if it is, then it's going to eventually be a nerf for this champion, right? It certainly lowers the variance of the champion, where the ability to get one shot is down because you have 110 more health here, but the ability to drain tank forever goes down because your healing is less. In a fight where you are doing 7,000 damage, you're getting a lot less healing out of it. So it's going to be up to you to decide, you know, which kind you are. In solo queue, this has been an overall win rate bump to Kayn of about 0.5%. Obviously, blue Kayn is buffed by more than red Kayn was. It has to be true that way. I don't know which build is better overall, but there is a lot of data, and it is an overall buff of 0.5% to Kayn. Next is LeBlanc, who gains some flat mana, some mana growth, and some base damage on distortion, which is a pretty big deal here. This ends up being another 0.5% win rate bump to the champion, although it's going to look a lot better on paper. LeBlanc's pick rate has gone up pretty substantially. Mana is up by 20 to 13%. Keep in mind, as soon as you buy a Lost Chapter around here, here's another 300 mana. It's going to be less than that. You know, the percentage-wise is going to go down by, you know, another 5, 8%, something like that. You know, around here, you've got Ludens. Here's 600 mana. So the plus 100 mana is half as useful as you might think because you already doubled your mana pool. So, you know, 7% more mana. But it still does matter. It is still some extra mana. It's still going to feel pretty good. Her mana pool is going to scale to about 2,000 at the end game. And of course, distortion damage certainly matters a little bit as well. So certainly they're not bad changes. But for the average player, it's not doing that much. For the average player, LeBlanc is not in too good of a spot. But I think she scales really hard with MMR. And so for elite players, it's probably going to be a pretty big deal. Nocturne no longer deals half damage to the primary target minion, so fewer cannons missed when taxing lanes. Good job, Nocturne. Thank you for the change. Pantheon jungle gains a lot in this patch, so his Q functionally just does 50% more damage than pre-patch to monsters. This ends up being a 3% win rate bump to Pantheon. That is a very, very, very big deal. It's also, interestingly, a 1% win rate bump to mid lane Pantheon, and actually support as well, weirdly enough. My read is that the fact that he has got a consistent bump everywhere else means that the increased value in neutral objectives is doing part of the Pantheon lifting, right? Globals are probably doing better in this patch because getting neutrals means more. They are more valuable. So, oh yes, I can always shove mid and then ult down. I can always make it to Dragon. I can always make it to Herald is a really, really big thing. And we actually might be heading into a globals focused metagame. We're going to see more Pantheon. We're going to see more TF. We're going to see more Shen. We're going to see more double TP, triple TP, because there's going to be even more fighting around these objectives because they are definitely more valuable. We'll talk about them later on in the patch rundown, but seems to be a pretty big deal. He is still, for the average player in solo queue, 47.5% win rate in jungle, which isn't very good. In mid lane, it's 52.5 though, so seems like a very, very strong mid laner to play. If you would like to gain MMR in this patch, Pantheon is a really good choice here because it seems like globals are doing really, really well in this. Next up is Renata Glasc, who is getting a 50 health nerf and a 2 base AD nerf. Obviously, if you can't all in the Enchanter, there's not much you can do to win the lane because it's going to poke you out. She has pretty decent CC as well. So a flat cut here certainly matters. Also, her best rune was Guardian. Guardian also gets nerfed in this patch, so we'll talk about that when it comes down. But ultimately, here's her health before and after, down pretty meaningfully. I mean, the early game is the one that means the most, and it's down, 7%, which is pretty meaningful. Base AD, not a huge deal, but a bit less poke, sure. But it ends up landing her at right about 50% win rate. She loses 1.75% win rate. She ends at 50.5. Solid nerf overall, decent set of changes. Still decently strong, still a good champion, but not overbearing. We then also have Seraphine. And so Seraphine loses AP ratio on W, both parts of it. Seraphine's an interesting spot where most players would rather play Seraphine in support. Support players have adopted Seraphine more than mid laners and bot laners have. Her best roles are actually bot lane. Mid and support are actually relatively close for what it's worth. Yeah, bot lane Seraphine is her best performing role. And so ideally, right, we'd love to find a spot where the support players are allowed to adopt Seraphine, play her because they like her. That's clearly where they want to play her for the most part, but also not make bot lane Seraphine so overbearing that they have to keep her down everywhere else. As far as I can tell, nerfing these AP ratios is one of the best ways to do that. And because it means that the gold skill you're getting by being a bot laner, by being a mid laner, is less important, and just getting heal and shield power or whatnot can mean a little bit more. Now, of course, unfortunately, heal and shield power got nerfed this patch, so, of course, that nerfs the support builds as well. But end of the day, this has been a bigger nerf to bot lane Seraphine than to support Seraphine. Support Seraphine is a 49.5% win rate laner. 49.5% win rate support right now, so she is fine. She is playable. If you like her, great. You're going to be fine with that one. Bot lane Seraphine is down to sub 52%. So still a strong bot laner, but not level of overbearing, broken, oh my gosh, ban pick every single game. So well-aimed nerfs that do more to nerf bot lane than support. She is more or less fine in support. She is not overbearing in bot lane, though still good there, to be clear. Pretty good spot to land. I don't know how they do the rest of the way. You could probably just keep different AP ratios forever, which would feel really bad, but maybe what's going to be required. But I think she's actually in a pretty good spot right now, which is good. As far as the numbers, here is, assuming you are getting some AP, here is the W shielding before and after due to the nerf, down a solid, 10% late game. The W healing down up to 6% late game as you get more AP. So, solid change here does affect the outputs. So next up is Sivir. Sivir gets a bug fix. Her Q is going to animate faster. Also, Ricochet is going to do less damage to minions, to tune about 20%, but will execute low health minions if they've been left really, really low on HP. So where does that put us? Well, of course, the animation on Q is not really important to math in any way, so we're not going to really focus on that one too much, but the reduced damage is 19% less damage to minions. However, if your Ricochet is going to get 15 bonus damage via executing a minion, then for the early game, it's actually a higher damage ability. Now, that said, I am not counting the expected value of critting in this calculation, so it becomes, even in execute case, a nerf earlier on, probably around here or something. But in the very, very early game, you will probably have a better time. You will probably have a better time last hitting with Ricochet. Yes, you're going to get 3 damage less per Ricochet every time until one of them executes. So, if you're attacking 4 times, you lose 3 on 3 non-executes, and then you gain 12 on the execute. Still more overall damage on the Ricochet. If you lose 3 on 3 non-executes, and then you gain 12 on execute, again, more damage overall. And so until you're, getting more and more Ricochets out, until it's critting, until the base damage gets higher and higher, then it's not a concern yet. But yeah, early game, probably slightly better wave clear, at least more consistent last hitting. Late game is going to be certainly less wave clear, even with the execute coming in, even on a single ricochet. End result ends up being a small win rate. Well, it's hard to say if it's actually a buff to Sivir. A lot of win rate trajectory on this champion is people learning new Sivir and, you know, optimizing builds and whatnot. So it's hard to say that it's like, this was actually a buff to the champion. Again, the Q change does matter here. Of course, this is a buff. This is, I would say, overall a nerf, I would think. But Sivir is resting at a 53% win rate champion. She is doing very well. She looks really fun. Definitely maybe the best champion of the patch, as far as I can tell. Absolutely outstanding champion, still very playable. She's probably due for more nerfs relatively soon. Next, we have Teemo, who gets a very little bit of mana growth, some nice placement range on the trap, a little bit of damage with the AP ratio on R, and even more mana buffs through the mana cost on R going down. Now, looking at Teemo overall, I actually play a fair bit of Teemo myself. This certainly feels quite nice. Keep in mind that a lot of players would go for Mana Flow Band. A lot of players would also go for things like Leandries instead of a Rift Maker to get more mana. You could at least go for it. It was a viable option. Biscuits could be done as well, for example, to kind of, you know, free up some mana issues. But of course, it means you can run more aggressive runes instead, since mana issues won't be quite as much of a thing. For funsies, I said, hey, how much does R cost as a function of his maximum mana? It goes from 18-11 to 17 to 5. So it becomes very, very trivial to cast. From my experiences playing Teemo, you mostly only ran out of mana really early on. It was pretty hard to from like level 12s onwards, it felt like, because your base mana was roughly high enough, and the mana cost wasn't that bad on the ability, at only 75, but certainly will help him a lot in traipsing around late game and getting more mushrooms down and trapping stuff up. The placement range, I think, is going to feel really, really good overall. And overall, just like a cool champion, one that I enjoy playing quite a bit. And, you know, I think it's just quite fun. This ends up being about a 0.5% win rate bump to the champion. Doesn't do a lot for the average Teemo out there. But he's also resting in a pretty solid spot, 50.5% roughly win rate as well. So totally solid champion. He's doing fine. Up he goes a little bit. Not a big deal. Varus gets a pretty simple change of +3 base AD. This ends up being a 1.5% win rate bump as well. Actually, oh yeah, by the way, here's the Teemo R damage before and after. It's 2% damage up. It's not a very big deal. Varus base AD up by 3. I'm not including W damage here. I could, but worth noting that this actually buffs his Q damage as well. I believe E is bonus AD, but Q is total AD. Could be wrong on the E one. I know Q is total AD though. So the base AD actually buffs Q damage as well as auto attacks. So it ends up being a pretty big deal overall for the champion. Again, a solid 1.5% win rate bump. Puts his overall win rate to right about 50%. So Varus is, you know, right in there. Completely playable. And if you like Varus, great. It's a good time to go for it. Doing early investigation into optimal builds on Varus. Looks like first item shield bow is by far his best option. Looks like it's undetermined right now on skill order, but looks like shield bow builds are doing very well on him, as opposed to doing like full lethality builds. They don't seem to be doing quite as well, although data is somewhat limited. Seems to be where it's at right now. We have Wukong changes. So Wukong is getting some base health regen up, but losing a lot of regen via the passive. It does stack up to 10 times. This is not exactly the math of max 10, but it's close enough. So here is the baseline health regen per minute here, which is up by 40% in the early game. So early laning a little bit nicer for, you know, top lane Wukong. And then beyond that, we have changes to the in-combat regen when you stack your passive up and get regen here. So the passive lasts 5 seconds. So though this is regen per minute to kind of explain or explore a like longer laning phase scenario, this is regen in 5 seconds, which is the regen over the course of just like your passive stack duration. Now I am rolling the base health regen buff into this number. So this is not just the passive. This is fully stacked passive plus passive, like his just base stats, regen over the course of 5 seconds when fully stacked. And that ends up being a 20% nerf to his in-combat regen. His total health per second in combat is down 20%. So he's getting, you know, if he takes a full trade, gets all his stacks up, he's gonna get 5 less total health back at level 6 over that window. He will get 12 total health back over the other 55 seconds when he's out of combat, but just the in-combat region is going to be like that, okay? The end result for these changes is that Wukong lost 1 3/4% win rate in jungle and lost under 1% win rate in top lane. So it now puts Wukong's top lane win rate at above his jungle win rate, puts his jungle win rate at just shy of 50%, So certainly completely playable, completely viable, absolutely an option if you want to play Jungle Wukong. But Jungle Wukong is no longer OP. His ban rate can freely drop. You do not need to ban Wukong against your average opponent. Sure, if they're Wukong main, if they're super sick of the champion, if you've done some scouting, you're doing Clash, whatever. But like in solo queue, Wukong is not an important ban. You may consider him annoying, okay, but Wukong is not actually doing anything special anymore. In the average case in solo queue, you can drop the ban. Top lane win rate 51 and 3/4, or sorry, 50 and 3/4. Totally viable, relatively strong top laner. Yuumi also getting nerfed as a champion who got a bit too much healing, getting nerfed not only by the AP ratio nerfs, but also the healing and shielding nerfs as well. This ends up being about a 1 1/3% win rate nerf, putting Yuumi at around 48 and change. So for the average player, Yuumi does not do very well. And of course, no compensation buffs or anything. She's just strictly weaker as a champion. So win rate is certainly going down. Was relatively balanced, now a little bit weak. But yep, healing is down 2 to 6%. And the more heal and shield power items you buy, the worse this gets. The final champion getting changed is Zeri. We are going to see ourselves with a change. So instead of a low health champion taking 60 to 150 damage off the uncharged auto attack, it will instead deal the garbage damage. But now executes with bonus damage. As long as the damage actually penetrates shields or invulnerability. This ends up being less damage overall, though. Keep in mind that if you're hitting a 1/3 health tower or a cannon minion, you are dealing bonus damage, dealing bonus damage, dealing bonus damage, finishing the target off. Now you just deal no damage and then eventually execute. So this isn't, I mean, this can help you like not miss last hits by not dealing 1 damage too little and leaving it up or whatever. But realistically, I don't think this is really much of a buff. The idea of execution certainly sounds scary, but I think in average, this is actually a nerf for the champion, losing the increased damage bonus. Also, 5 damage off of Lightning Crash certainly hurts a little bit as well. This, by the way, this part is just how much damage is the Q passive auto without and with building AP. AP does not scale it that hard. It's not that big of a deal. You're not getting these big, several hundred damage executes just because you build AP on the champion. Not really that big of a deal. It doesn't do too much. As far as the R damage, this is, what is my base AD? What's my bonus AD? What's my Q rank? Roll all that in, add the R damage on top, and it's like, yeah, my auto attack damage is like down like 1 to 3%. This isn't counting critting, to be fair. So there is, I think some crit math that maybe makes it a little bit less of a nerf percentage-wise, but like ultimately, the end result has been about a 3% win rate nerf to Zeri. She is sitting for the average player in solo queue at 45.5% win rate. Doesn't look good for the average solo queue player. We move on to items changes. Gangplank Chainsword gets 200 gold more expensive. It was incredibly overpowered in 12.11, which I and other analysts called when that one came through. But yeah, really, really too good of an item. It's 12.14, not 13, of course. But the 200 gold cost increase still keeps it 150% gold efficient. I personally would have rather seen like 5 AD go off or something. And maybe even 5 haste. That would be maybe a bit too much, but I would have rather seen 200 gold of stats go off the item because I am a really big fan of these Grievous Wound items being cheap. Like, yes, you can always drop 800 for Executioners or like a Oblivion Orb. You can kind of go Remeless. That one's a bit more awkward, of course. But upgrading all the way, I think, should be allowed to be a cheap option. Gangplank Chainsword is now the most expensive Grievous Wounds item, which I don't like. I don't like this item being placed at like, yeah, it's like the same price as Black Cleaver. You just pick Black Cleaver or Chainsword, when I feel like Chainsword should be the, oh yeah, they've got healing. I need to divert my build into this. Let my diversion be short while not taxing me too many stats. And then I can move on to item 3, item 4, get my GA and stuff online. So kind of how I feel about these items, that these side steps, these divergences should be cheap. And again, the fact that Executioners exists and is only 800 gold is a really, really good thing. I think that shouldn't go up in price ever. But just, kind of would like to see it keep that 2,500 gold roughly price point with Morellonomicon, with Putrefire, with Mortal Reminder, personally, would have felt that way. Even Thornmail, I think, should be made cheaper as well. Minor thing though, enchanter items lose 2 to 4% heal and shield power. Most enchanters, of course, can only really get like one legendary online in the average game. So, you know, if it's Moonstone Renewer, okay, you get one less stack of heal and shield power, and then like maybe you miss out on redemption, so you're getting, you know, another 4% heal and shield power down. Definitely does nerf enchanters, right? It is less shielding, it is less healing. It certainly does make an effect here. Not the end of the world, but it does nerf them down. And as you saw, you know, Janna's overall changes 0.4% win rate down. Yuumi's overall changes 1.33% win rate down. Her nerfs were bigger, to be fair. You know, it'll be a relatively small nerf to, you know, champions like Sona and Soraka as well. Not huge, but will be happening. So the next thing to talk about is Sunfire Aegis. Was getting poached a lot by DPS champions. The build I've seen, for example, was Nashor's Tooth Sunfire on Diana. 0 bonus health in that build, except for like the mythic passive Sunfire Aegis. And yeah, it made that build kind of, you know, a little bit OP. So instead of scaling based on character level, it just has a higher bonus health ratio scaling with a flat value. Now, this is one of the mythics that scales from level 1, which is silly and trivial because no one can buy mythic level 1. Pick a number, start there, go from there, whatever. But we can talk about immolate damage. So this is assuming you are going to be building bonus health at a relatively high rate. Like right here, this is the amount of bonus health you'd have if you had Sunfire, Rhyolite, and Demonic. Not counting runes, not counting Gadoran Shield. But using the mythic passive on that one, you know, the damage is relatively close. It's down 6%. It's down by 3. Not a huge deal. If you buy it first item, actually the higher base value does pretty well. You get some solid stuff out of it, but it does scale down even with moderate health buying. Now, should you be more than 3 items at 16? I don't know. But if this is your build right here, here's where it is, right? 1610 bonus HP at level 18 is the mark for this one. Now, if all you do is buy just a Sunfire Cape, Sunfire Aegis, then these are your numbers, and it's down by a lot more. Let's say you get your first Mythic online, and so you get your Mythic passive, and it's like a little bit higher here, and then at like level, you know, 15, you get your third item online, it's plus 550, you get a little bit more damage here. It's like, well, yeah, cool. You know, I get my 6th item, it's plus 600, or, you know, my 4th legendary, 4th total item, it's like, well, look, it's not doing so hot, right? Like, if you're not actually buying health, the damage of Sunfire Aegis is down a very, very, very large amount, and it's not worth going for this play at all. If you aren't getting any bonus health in any way, the damage is always worse. If you are building a decent amount of bonus health, it's not too bad. And your numbers are actually a little bit higher. So, or at least comparable, right? You know, if like here is a Giant's Belt, you know, anyway, moving on. So yeah, relatively the same item for anyone who's building health items, and then definitely worse if you're doing, you know, Nashor's, Sunfire, Zhonya's Death Cap, right? That's what's going on there. Next thing is early game sustain is down by a lot through potions and runes. So 30 health fewer per potion. That means Longsword 3 is 90 less health. Refillable is 50 less health. Corrupting is 75 less health. Biscuit, 2% less missing health. So let's see, if you're missing 400 health, it's 80 less health out of that one. And you get 3 of them, so pretty meaningful there. 10 less max mana, which I feel like is unneeded, but whatever. Bone plating cooldown is up. Conditioning, my understanding, is nerfed only because the other runes around it are getting nerfed, and so to keep win rate parity, because they're all fairly competitive, conditioning is going to take a nerf just because they want to keep win rate at parity. So okay, fair enough. Still a very, very good rune for squishies, although as it goes down, the comparison gets a bit weaker. Guardian cooldown certainly matters. Scorch plus 5 damage, a little bit. But yeah, 20-second Guardian cooldown early game, certainly going to matter. Scorch plus 5 damage, okay. Second wind, the flat regen is down by 3. Keep in mind that if you're missing, again, if you're missing 100 health, you're getting 4. So like if you're missing 100 health, this is a 9-point regen becomes a 7-point regen. Sorry, 10 becomes 7. I mean, a 30% nerf to a rune is a very big deal, but that's only at 100 missing. So, you know, if you're missing 300, you go from, what, 12 plus 6 is 18 to 12 plus 3 is 15. It's like a 15-ish percent nerf. There you go. Sudden impact, about 1% more damage for lethality users, about 0.5% more damage for magic pen users. A solid amount of extra damage while it's on. Time up tonic, I just don't think move speed really makes sense in this rune anymore. I think the number is so small that it's completely vestigial, and it can't be felt, and it can't be appreciated, and no one brings this rune for the move speed anymore, so I think this is a mechanic that should disappear. I think just tune how aggressive your potions are, and that's fine. Like, let that be the rune where your potions just, yeah, they burn up, you know, at the very start. That's fine. Whatever, they burn faster, they're front loaded, who cares? Unflinching, 5 less tenacity to straight up. Just at all points in time, you have 5 less tenacity. and 5 less slow resist. Definitely matters, right? Overall nerf to the rune. People are going to be locked down for longer, of course. Challenging smite. People that are talking about challenging smite are doing 11% more damage to you now. Certainly gets people a little bit more off challenging smite, more towards blue. Overall, I nerfed the junglers, to be fair, because of course, right, is a tool they could use to be more powerful. Exhaust, also you're going from doing 0.6 to 0.65, so it's like a 8 and change % damage bump to someone who's exhausted. Useful there as well. So again, all-ins are being less brought down. Okay, fine. And then the really, really big thing of this patch, really big buffs to Drakes and such. Let's talk about it, all right? So the current health damage on Drakes is going up by 28%. Going down by 28%. And their attack damage is going down by 30%. Those are basically the same number. So it's 29% less damage from Drakes. That's the math. As far as the health on the Drakes, they are up pretty substantially. The health per level is up about 50%. The flat health is up by a bit less than that, but we could talk about the numbers right here and what it means. So, assuming that the dragon is hitting you at full health, here is the Infernal Drake DPS before and after, or damage per attack before and after. And again, it's down 29%. The dragon durability is up 40%, and then when the Rift transforms, you go to the third dragon of the game, it's up 60%. Worth noting that as you take less damage and dragons deal and take longer to kill, the total damage taken, this 99% right here, the total damage taken while fighting a dragon is going to be functionally unchanged. That if it takes you 500 health of your health bar to kill a dragon, you will still lose 500 health when you finish killing the dragon. It will just take 40% longer, and you take 28% less damage while doing it. So dragons will take longer to kill, especially the later ones that move toward Dragon Soul. So the first couple, not so bad. The later ones, definitely a very much more meaningful time investment. The idea being that it gives a defending team more time to show up and fight you over dragon. More going to be like, no, we have to turn and take a real team fight. We're not just going to smite and jump the wall because we can't burn it that quickly, as dragons don't have too much health for that. So dragons, more deadly. Well, sorry, less deadly. Just you're going to be at the objective longer, and it gives people time to fight you for it. That's the goal, right? Action goes up. Because my understanding is Riot is happy with how long fights take. Like, they're happy with the durability update and the fact people aren't getting one-shot nearly as often, that there's more time to react to what's going on. You can reposition, you can make some plays, you can peel. They like how the team fights feel. However, there is a lot less action in the game now because you can't just win an all-in your lane anymore because they've got 70 more health and some more armor and whatnot. You can't get the all-in. So what is an early game champion to do? Oh, well, get lane pressure and go for Drake. Because there's also big buffs to what the dragons actually give. So I win my lane, I force a recall, I can still get Drake no problem. But if we're not crushing and we're going back and forth, I also shouldn't be able to sneak the Drake. You can contest me. And so either I'm rewarded for early pressure and I get my objectives that you can't stop me anyway, because it's not like more lethal, I'll just take a little bit longer. So like if I could take Drake, I can still take Drake. But if it is a close game, we're going to fight for this. And we're going to fight for it because the value is a lot higher. Cloud Drake got doubled in value, not the soul, but the Drake itself. But the Drake stack is worth twice as much. The other Drake stacks are worth 50% more. And so we're going to investigate. We're going to investigate and estimate. That's what investigate is. We're going to investigate and estimate the value of the dragons. So first up, Cloud buff. So Riot roughly prices slow resist at the same value as tenacity. And so you can vaguely call the 7% slow resist buff at one stack of Cloud Drake about 50 gold. Now, sometimes you might be against a team with no slows. If the top laner is Renekton, if the jungler is, Ari, if the support is Leona, if the AD carry is, Vayne, we're not going to be against really any slows, so it's just a matter of, this does literally nothing. Now, the nice thing is you can price the move speed, and the move speed is actually pretty good. Out-of-combat move speed is roughly priced at half the value of in-combat move speed. I think that's fair. And so no matter what, you're getting about 160 gold value per character on your team in move speed. And in many team comps, you're also getting about 50 gold of value in slow resist. On average, you can call it about 200 gold per member per Drake, right? Now, I want to bring out one more thing, though, which is, here's a pop quiz, okay? You are playing Malphite against a 5 AD team. It's the perfect comp for you. Would you rather the game give you a cloth armor, or would you rather the game give you 300 gold? This should be a very obvious answer, but the answer is 300 gold. Because let's say you're trying to build Sunfire Aegis to like win your lane because you're against Renekton, and what you really want is a Balmy Cinder to get lane pressure. A cloth armor is cute and all, but like you really want Balmy Cinder. So like I want to finish that item already. In a world where I've already got the Balmy Cinder and I've got the Aegis, or like the little Aegis of the Legion to build Sunfire Aegis, it's like, okay, an extra cloth armor is eventually useful when I build a Frozen Heart, but like I want to finish Sunfire Aegis, so like give me the gold. Let's say I'm building Frozen Heart, and I've got Warden's Mail and a Dish Rod already. I don't need another cloth armor right now. I don't need 15 armor. I need to finish Frozen Heart. The idea is, yeah, sometimes, and of course, I'm even biasing it by saying it's a cloth armor because cloth armor is building into stuff. Would you rather the game give you 15 armor or 300 gold? And then it's obvious, because I can use the 300 gold as effectively as possible. Now, some players are going to make really, really bad, irrational choices and are going to build their champions improperly. But even outside of that, players will, in general, like finishing Noonquiver is worth more than 300 gold. Finishing Deathcap is worth more than 1,100 gold. Finishing whatever item, right? The control wards are worth more than 75 gold, right? There's a bunch of things that are just OP that are really, really good that you always want to buy. Everyone would rather have 200 gold than a Cloud Drake buff in almost all cases, because they can spend the 200 gold on finishing a mythic. But it is at least a good like demonstration of the basic value of what's going on here. Because outside of hitting breakpoints, items are just worth their weight in gold. And so in a world where, yeah, I can either buy a cloth armor or get 15 armor, they are the same thing until you finish Sunfire, right? Until you finish Balmy Cinder, until you finish Frozen Heart, 300 gold and a cloth armor, 300 gold and 15 armor are the same thing for like a Malphite. So there are times where it really is exactly gold value and times where it's not gold value because you'd rather have it combined if it were like converted into gold. Hope that makes sense. Let's continue on to the other Drakes. So the Hextech buff, in the ideal case, is 450 gold of value of both these things. Now, there are not a lot of champions who want both attack speed and ability haste. Aurelia cares, Jax cares, Ashe cares. A lot of junglers like Viego and Wukong will care. So like fighters and marksmen do, but mages don't, tanks don't, enchanters don't. There's a bunch of classes where you're only getting this 225 per stack, right? There are some you're getting 400 or so per stack, but for most of your team, you're getting 225 per stack, right? So like we're getting 2,000 times 5 people, right? Like a Cloud Drake is giving your team roughly 1,000 gold of value. This Hextech buff is giving you maybe 1,500 gold of value if 2 of your champions use the attack speed as well. You're getting maybe 600 gold worth of value for killing a Hextech soul. It probably makes it better than Cloud, to be honest. And this also assumes that, slow resist and move speed are being valued the right amount. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're underpriced. But in terms of the value of these stats, 5 of them are going to use the ability haste. 2 of them are going to use the ability haste and the and the attack speed. Maybe it's actually only, maybe the one of them doesn't use the ability haste because, Vayne doesn't care for the haste really, so who cares? Leona won't use it that much. I don't know, but, we'll say you use 6 of the 10 buffs, and it's a bit more than Cloud buff. We go to Infernal, and it's like, well, Infernal is interesting because it multiplies your base AD and your bonus AD. So if you get it, really early on, like around here, and you don't have a bunch of bonus attack damage yet, you're like, I'm Ashe with a longsword or a Doran's blade, and it's like, well, okay, I was getting 4 AD, I'm getting 6 AD. This is worth about 200 gold worth of stats. Okay, that's kind of nice. 200 gold, I've seen that before, right? But if you're like really late game Ashe and you have, 300 total AD or something like that, it's like, oh, I'm getting 600 gold worth of stats. Now again, you would rather have 600 gold to finish, and would you rather have 18 AD or a finished Infinity Edge? And the answer is obvious, right? You'd rather finish an Infinity Edge. So again, I would rather have 600 gold on Ashe than an Infernal Drake on Ashe, right? Every single time, of course. And there's also champions like Maokai or Syndra or whoever else that doesn't use the AD actually at all and doesn't get full value. So 1 or 2 champions get this buff, and it depends when you do it, right? So, it's between 300 and 1,200. It's 300 to 1,200 value. For 2 of your champions, maybe it's like more like 400 to 200, or 400 to 1,200, based on who on your team is getting the Drake buff for 1 stack. Right? Wukong and Ashe both get it. They feel really good about it. Now, as far as the AP side of it's concerned, and let's actually get the white background behind this one to make it a little bit easier to read for everyone. What about the ability power? What about the ability power value? Well, if I'm a mage, if I'm Syndra, and then we get an early Drake, I get like 3 AP out of this from like my stat shard and my Doran's ring or whatever, or my Dark Seal. So I'm getting 60 gold worth of value. It's not a ton. And, if you're a Janna, you're really only ever getting, so much AP. Realistically, you're kind of stopping here at some points. But how many mages are you running in your team? Is it tank top, fighter jungle, mage mid, AD carry, and enchanter support? It's like, okay, well, we're getting, 75 to 350. And it's like, okay, well, the total value is 475, 475 in the early game to, 1500 in the late game, right? If it's 2 AD, 1 AP, like, Leon doesn't care, Ornn doesn't care, like, does Ornn also care about ability haste? You can make the call he doesn't. But, a bunch of people are like, oh my god, dude, Infernal's so good, you get so many stats, it's so great. And it's like, well, I mean, kind of, as we're gonna, fill this up. Like, in the early game, it's actually less because you can use stuff right away. In the late game, it's comparable. And this is 2 AD, 1 AP, which feels reasonable, right? You have two characters who don't really scale off AD or AP and aren't going to use it by much. Maybe it's undercounted. Maybe Malphite will use his, 5 bonus AD a fair bit, and it'll be nice for him. But this is, I think, a reasonable approximation. This one obviously scales quite a bit over the course of time, right? And then we have Mountain Drake. Mountain Drake gets buffed by 50% as well. So we can look at the numbers, right? So Hextech, right? 6 becomes 9%, 4% becomes 6%, and then 6 becomes 9% on Mountain Drake as well. So what are the numbers in this one? Well, if you're a squishy, if you're like Ashe, okay, well you used to get this much armor and MR on average, each one from the kill, and you get this much armor and MR each one from the kill. So, I'm getting this much on average armor and MR, so it's about 100 gold value in the early game, and about 250 gold value as well late game. And so at the bare minimum, right? At the bare minimum, it's 500 to 1250. If my whole team is squishy and we have no tanks at all, we get 500 to 1200 value on this Drake. But maybe some of my champions are tanky, right? And if they're tanky, they're getting more like 200 gold value to 700 gold value. So are we doing 3 and 2 again? Right? We're doing in this case, right, we're saying, okay, well, look, there's 2 AD, 1 AP, here's the total value. Okay, let's say it's what? 3 squishy, 2 durable. And so it's like, okay, it's 300 to, 750 for the squishies. And for the durables, it's, 400 to, let's call it 1300 for like the durable ones. And so what's the total value? Well, it's 700 to 2,000, right? Like basically, like we can do it this way. Control Alt V. Yeah, we did it. So, right, here's the value of Mountain Drake. It's like about 700 to 2,000 gold of value. So, 700 to 2,000, 500, 1,500, around 1,300, but flat, and doesn't scale, about 1,000 for Cloud Drake. Again, these all depend on comp, but like this is the rough numbers looking at, right? I think it's fair to call each dragon worth about 1,000 gold, and some of them scale and are worth more like 1,500, right? In a world where you have 2 champions who really are. And by the way, like, I'm taking like a pretty substantial amount of bonus armor MR for this one. If your fighter is building like Trinity Force and Anathemas and like just a GA and all they get is plus 40 armor, it's not very good, right? And so it's like, well, this could be 4x, right? This could be 400 to 1,000, and this could be 200 to 650, right? And then it would be 600 to 1,600, right? Like it just depends, right? So it depends on the champions you have in your team, but that's kind of what we're looking at here, right? That this is kind of like the world we're living in for what the value of one Drake stack is. And it's like, yeah, we can basically call each Drake about 1,000 gold. And again, you'd rather have the gold to combine items, but you can say, yeah, they grabbed a cloud buff. They got about 1,000 gold split across the team in out-of-combat move speed. It's pretty close to that. They got Hextech. So great, for someone like Ashe, she got 400 gold of value. For someone like Syndra, she got 200 gold of value. It's about 1,000-ish gold of value. If you're just rounding, just round, and it's fine. You got a Mountain Drake. Okay, well, you got it really early on, so it's not worth a whole lot just yet, but hey, later on, it's going to be really, really nice. I mean, what's nice is a Mountain Drake really is just, when a Infernal Drake, rather, really just is like, just 6% bonus outgoing damage. And what's interesting, though, is for a champion like Vayne, where Vayne doesn't care about her AD, she cares about her attack speed and her crit chance for her Rage Blade. Like, she doesn't care that she got plus 10 AD. Whereas Ashe needs that AD for every single bit of her damage output, right? Vayne's AD could be 0 and she can still do damage out of Silver Bolts and Rageblade. And the base AD like doesn't actually matter here. So again, it's high variance. And again, it scales here as well. But yeah, you know, if we're solidly in mid game, you know, 2 of this, 1 of this, 750, right? Like, you know, right? 2 of those and that gold value is around here, right? Those are the numbers, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. I think that's actually pretty relevant. If we're looking at, you know, 4 of that plus this, right? Here's the numbers. This is probably actually like the almost better version of it, to be honest. But yeah, like this is actually what you're getting out of these drakes. Whereas like this is just obviously like it doesn't really scale with anything as far as gold value is concerned. Drakes are worth about 1,000 gold. Souls are, of course, worth a whole lot more. Ocean Drake, 50% more regen here as well. This one a bit more awkward to price just because regen is a weird thing to price. It costs a lot in the shop. Elder Dragon buffed a little bit as well in durability. Again, the fight's going to take longer to clear. They're worth a little bit more. One more thing to talk about is Rift Herald has more more health on the second summon, and gives luck gold to the team that kills it, which means it is much easier to rally around your second Herald and be like, nope, we are going for a turret. It's going to crash. It's going to do more stuff. We're going to get more out of this one. We can sit around for longer. Specifically, the ability to charge the Herald into a second turret. Much, much more possible to do. Since we'll have a lot more health left over. Won't just die to the eye pop at the end. Getting the second charge out of second Herald, going to be a bit more of a thing. And of course, just talk about the sort of expected value of a Herald. I think Herald was ordered with 100 gold to kill it, so 100. And it would on average get you 2 turret plates. So first Herald was worth about 420 gold. Now it's worth about 620 gold, which is a pretty meaningful upgrade, right? Of course, something that killed your turret, okay, sure, whatever. Second Herald was worth finishing a turret, so it was worth 500 gold, plus 100 local, so it was worth like 600 gold, kind of. And now it goes from 600 to 800 gold in total value. But it's also going to get another charge. It's going to get most of another turret down. So it does feel like there's a lot of value in that one. Does seem pretty good. Otherwise, nothing too much to talk about here. So let's scroll up. 12.14 TLDR. A lot going on with this patch. A lot of champions are getting more health and less healing. Aatrox gets about a 1.25% win rate bump overall off the reliability bonus health, but a bit less healing overall in a pretty good spot. Alistar also 1.5% win rate bump, also landed at a good spot off of a lower mana cost and lower cooldown. Both these champions pretty viable for solo queue. Feel free to play them. Gangplank, much less durability in the early game. Gets more health around level 7, but with the armor nerf, gets more physical durability around level 10. Less damage on parley, less damage on powder kegs early on, less slowing on powder kegs basically at all points in time, but gets a compensation in that you get more damage on the passive if you have some bonus crit chance, and the theoretical late game base damage of parley and powder keg are up as well. This ends up being a rather large nerf to Bruiser Gangplank. This ends up being a much smaller nerf to crit Gangplank, though for average solo queue, he is weak in both builds, but for average solo queue, the crit build is more performant based on early data. Gnar gets a bit less health and a bit less health regen scaling. This ends up being about a 1.75% win rate nerf, putting him pretty low for the average solo queue player. Probably kicks him a bit out of pro play as well. We'll see what happens. Janna gets some system changes later on because enchanter items are being nerfed, but gets a 10 flat shield, gets less shield and heal power from the E buff, gets some more flat heal on Monsoon as well as an AP ratio buff. This ends up being, of course, like the baseline value is a strict buff to the abilities. With the heal and shield power come in, it ends up relatively flat. Ends up being an overall very, very small, like 1/4% win rate nerf to Janna. Not a big deal, still relatively strong. Jarvan gets a big AD ratio buff on Q and a cooldown buff on E. Ends up being pretty solid. 1.5% win rate up on him as well. Approaches 50% win rate. Seems to be a relatively powerful champion. And it seems as though you can choose between Gore Drinker or Sunfire / Chem Tank builds, and both work pretty well. So finds room for variance there to be a more of a tank ganker, and you can do it just fine. Kayn gets 10 health growth, and a nerf that only affects red Kayn, so a strict buff to blue Kayn. Red Kayn loses some healing, but I think overall it's actually this will still end up being a buff to red Kayn in most games. The very end game numbers, when you have 170 more health, it will require around 3,400 spell damage dealt to champions after armor MR for this change to be a nerf. Overall, probably not going to be that much of it. So overall, looks like Kayn is in a pretty good spot. This puts his win rate up about 0.5% on the patch. LeBlanc gains some mana and mana growth and some flat damage on W. This ends up putting her at about a another 0.5% win rate bump. Some of that could be players who are bad at LeBlanc come back to the champion, of course. But overall, for the average player, weak in solo queue. But we're probably going to see her back in pro play. Going to see her back in high MMR as well. Nocturne, a nice, sort of, not exactly a bug fix, but no longer gets screwed when attacking the primary target when it's a minion. Good. Last hitting cannons and melee is going to be that little bit easier. Pantheon gets a 50% damage bump in his Q against monsters. That is a very, very, very big deal. It is a 3% win rate bump to Pantheon in the jungle. He also gained 1% win rate in mid lane and support, making me believe that the increased value in Drakes and Heralds in this patch, we'll talk about it in a little bit, is a just buff to Pantheon overall. And I think we will probably end up seeing Pantheon, TF, and Shen very much in the metagame because players are going to be playing a lot around the new neutral objectives. Renata Glasc loses 50 health and 2 base AD. Not a huge deal, but is a pretty meaningful nerf. Loses almost 2% win rate. Still above 50% for the average player in solo queue. Still a strong enchanter, but certainly you can pick her off a lot more in laning phase. Seraphine gets a AP ratio nerf to both parts of W. This is trying to close the gap between the gap between bot lane farm Seraphine, which is really, really OP, and support Seraphine, which is only okay. And the thing is, most Seraphine players want to play support Seraphine. Turns out, support players are attracted to playing Seraphine. This is the kind of champion they want to play. Mid laners and bot laners seem to only play her because she's strong. There are fewer people who are like, I really want to play Seraphine because I like Seraphine. So even though support is one of her worst roles, this is where people want to play her, and so Riot's trying to cater to that because the players have spoken with their time. This ends up being a much bigger nerf to bot lane Seraphine than it is to support Seraphine. This brings the win rates pretty close together. Support Seraphine, 49.5. Bot Seraphine, sub 52. So not overbearing in the bot lane, probably dips out of pro play priority, though still viable, and still, again, relatively strong. Whereas for support Seraphine, she is certainly playable at 49.5. It's fine. Totally play if you want to. You're going to be okay. There is still a win rate difference there. They might do more AP ratio changes at some point in time, but she's fine. Sivir is doing very, very well. 53% win rate bot laner. Gets a buff in that her Q can be cast more quickly in the animation itself. Ricochet, though, is going to do less damage to minions. However, it will execute. What basically this means is up until around level 13, a single hit Ricochet can do more damage if it executes, right? If you're going to get the execute through, you'll actually do more damage overall. In the very early landing phase, if you like Q through the wave, then you like go for, the bounce and whatnot, you will actually find yourself getting a bit more total damage throughput on W because you get the 15 bonus damage in the execute, and then, it's 5 less damage on the initial bounces, but the third one executed, and so I got more damage out of it. So basically, damage up early, down late is the play here. Boomerang Blade, spell, casting speed up late, and that should feel pretty good as well. So win rate-wise, it's pretty flat on the patch, but 53% win rate champion, pretty strong champ overall. Teemo gains a pretty small amount of power, ultimately. This is about a 0.5% win rate bump, but more mana growth, more placement range on the traps, more damage on the traps, and mana cost scaling down to the ulti. Ends up being actually relatively low value, but Teemo's already in a pretty solid spot. Approaching 51% win rate, pretty solid champion, definitely playable. Varus gains 3 base AD, which of course buffs his auto attack damage, but also his Q is a total AD ratio, so actually strictly buffs his Q damage here as well. Ends up being a 1.5% win rate bump, putting him right about 50% win rate. Varus is back on the menu, a viable, playable champion, seems good. Wukong gains some base health regen, but loses regen through his passive. This ends up, of course, upping his out-of-combat regen, nerfing his in-combat regen. This ends up being a moderate nerf to top lane Wukong, but a double-size nerf to jungle Wukong. So jungle Wukong is actually sub 50% win rate for solo queue. We'll probably see him drop off of pro prio as well. I think people are going to take a long time to realize how much this nerf actually matters. And it'll take some time for people to wean off this, but he should be off your ban list. Wukong is no longer an overpowered jungler. It's only if your opponents are good at Wukong, and if you're playing solo queue, you don't know that, pick a different ban. Yuumi gets nerfed. Not only does her heal go down by a 5% AP ratio, but also, of course, Enchanter items got nerfed as well. This ends up being about a 1.3% win rate nerf in solo queue. She's definitely low win rate overall in solo queue. You could drop the ban for sure. We probably see her drop off for pro as well, because one of her best friends in Zeri also got heavily nerfed. So instead of doing bonus damage to low health targets, you don't do that bonus damage at all unless they are really, really low, in which case you execute them. This ends up being an overall nerf to the Q auto attack passive. These numbers are the same numbers, by the way, as the old numbers, by the way. It's just an execute now instead of dealing the damage every single time. So it's an overall nerf to the champion. Lightning Crash also does 5 less damage per hit. Zeri certainly was overbearing for pro play. She was not overpowered for most players in solo queue. But was a pro play problem, and so they are trying this out as an attempted fix towards pro play, as off they go. But yeah, Zeri loses 3% win rate on the patch. She is in a very, very bad spot. Please don't bother playing Zeri in solo queue. She's not worth it right now. We'll see if she gets a micro patch something, but here we are. Then we go on to items changes. So Gangplank Chainsword became very overtuned with the changes from 12.11, surprising no one. I called it out right away. Other analysts did, of course, as well. And now it's 200 gold more expensive. So the efficiency goes from like 125% to about 115%. Still quite efficient. Still a pretty good item. So, you know, you're paying negative gold for the Grievous Wounds passive. Feel free to add Gangplank Chainsword in your builds. Enchanter items lose 2 to 4% heal and shield power. So as enchanters scale up, their shielding is less. Many of them are still in a pretty good spot. Janna's fine, Renata's fine. Yuumi is weak, but Yuumi got actually directly nerfed as well. Sona and Soraka, I'm pretty sure, are fine as well, but just small nerfs overall. The big one is Sunfire Aegis. Sunfire Aegis no longer scales on level, just scales more sharply with bonus health. So if your build is Nashor's Tooth, Sunfire, Zonia's, you are doing a lot less damage to Sunfire, to the tune of almost 50% less damage in some cases. But if you're doing Sunfire, Ryleigh's Demonic, or Warmogs, or Black Cleaver, or Chainsword, or all these things, you're not going to feel those nerfs very much. It's going to be like, depending on how quickly you can build these items, it could be 0, it could be a little bit more damage, it could be like 2% less damage, but it's really, really close on a sort of modeled item build, unless you weren't building health and the damage is down by a lot. This probably gets rid of a lot of the Nashor's Tooth Sunfire builds out there. Additionally, there were nerfs to potions, so 30 less health per health potion, 50 less health on a refillable, 75 less health on a corrupting potion. Biscuits give you 2 less health per 100 health missing. So if you're missing 500 health, you're losing 10 health off the biscuit, I guess. A little bit less mana given, but whatever. Bone plating, 10 seconds on the cooldown. Conditioning, 1 armor and MR gone, and 1% increase gone as well. Okay, fine. Guardian, 20 seconds off the early cooldown. That's going to be hurting, of course, quite as well. Scorch getting 5 damage. Second Wind getting a bit less regen. This is going to be like a 15% nerf to the rune, roughly. Sudden Impact is about 1% more damage to lethality users and 0.5% more damage to Magic Pen users. Time Warp Tonic gives less move speed. Whatever, pretty minor thing here. And a flat 5% less tenacity and slow resist no matter what on Unflinching. So a bunch of nerfs to items that made it harder to kill you. Same with Challenging Smite, losing 10% damage reduction, and Exhaust, losing 5% damage reduction. Pretty meaningful changes here as well for trying to block out kills. We'll see more junglers go to Blue Smite, of course. See what comes out of that. The big changes in this patch, though, are the Drake changes. So Drakes deal 29% less damage, and they take 40% longer to kill. This means if you were to solo a Drake, it will take you 40% longer, but you will lose the same total amount of health over the course of the fight. If your team's fighting the Drake, same thing is going on. Takes you 40% longer. You take the same total amount of damage during that time. Which means that though the dragon is no less threatening over the course of the fight, though it's no more, no less threatening, it will take you longer, which means it will allow the other team to show up more reliably and be able to say, hey, we want to contest this one. But this also means is that the buffs get buffed. So not only is it more contestable, but they are more worth contesting. Cloud Soul itself gets stronger. The Cloud buff is double value. The Hextech Drake buff, the Infernal Drake buff, the Mountain Drake buff, and the Ocean Drake buff are all 50% more value. The TLDR is that Drakes are, if you really want to just dumb it down and say, screw it, it's this number, a Drake is going to be worth about 1,000 gold in stats. It varies wildly based on how many champions can actually use the Infernal Drake AD buff, because the AD buff is better than the AP buff. If you only have one AD champion, then guess what? It's less value. If you get it early on, when you have less AD, guess what? It's less value. If you get it later on, guess what? It's more value. But if you want a really quick TLDR, a Drake is worth about 1,000 gold. It's consistent across all of them. Yes, some scale, but you pick a good middle point, 1,000 gold for a Drake. Because they've been buffed by 50 to 100%. That means they were worth 500 to 700 gold. Now they're worth about 1,000 gold, okay? 1,000 gold is roughly the value of these drakes. Elder Dragon, also a bit tankier, valuable there as well. So, drakes are 50% more. Rift Herald, if we look at what happens with Rift Herald, talk about the first Rift Herald kill, right? You'd kill it, you get 100 gold. You kill the triple with it, you get 400 gold total. 400 becomes 600 because 200 local gold is now being granted. That means Rift Herald is worth 50% more, much like the drakes. Second Herald worth a whole lot more though, right? You still get that 200 local gold bonus, which is nice, but it is much, much more likely you can bring that Herald onto a second charge on a second turret, and you want to kind of sharpen it in, and maybe there's going to be some action created over using that second Herald. I think these are actually some really cool changes. I think they're really clever changes. I think they are positive choices. The objectives are worth more. Grouping for objectives, worth more. Cool beans. That's going to do it, basically. That is the patch rundown. That is the TLDR. We are 1 hour in. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.